There was a moment in Earth's story that reads less like history and more like a page torn from science fiction. But this was no imagination, no fantasy novel. It happened, and it reshaped the world in ways that would seem alien to us today. Imagine walking into a forest and inhaling air so thick with oxygen that each breath feels sharp, almost intoxicating, until your head spins with a light, dangerous euphoria. This wasn't a brief episode. For nearly 60 million years, our planet lived in such a state. This was the Carboniferous period, about 300 million years ago, when Earth's atmosphere held nearly 35% oxygen, far more than the 21% we breathe today. That number may sound small, a mere difference of percentages, but in practice it was enormous. With every breath, flames could roar higher, insects could grow to monstrous sizes, and even the chemistry of life itself was altered. Imagine a world where a single bolt of lightning could set whole rainforests ablaze, unstoppable infernos leaping from one soggy trunk to another, as if water no longer mattered. It was a planet balanced on the knife's edge between creation and destruction. And in this oxygen-rich world, life thrived in bizarre and terrifying forms. Dragonflies the size of hawks patrolled the skies. Millipedes longer than sofas crawled through damp undergrowth. Scorpions nearly as large as house cats lurked in the shadows, their armor glinting under a canopy of towering primitive plants. It was a time when nature's experiments ran wild, pushing the limits of biology to extremes that would never again be possible. The continents themselves were not yet scattered like puzzle pieces across the oceans as we know them today. Instead, they were slowly assembling into one vast supercontinent, Pangaea, a massive land stretching from pole to pole, ringed by a single, endless ocean. But what truly defined the Carboniferous was not the shape of the land, nor even the arrangement of the seas. It was the forests. These were not the familiar woods of pines, oaks, or flowering plants. There were no grasses swaying in the wind, no bees buzzing in sunlit fields. Instead, the forests of the Carboniferous were dark, humid, alien. Towering club mosses called lycopsids grew like skyscrapers, some over 100 feet tall, their hollow water-filled stems glistening in the mist. Giant horsetails and seed ferns rose beside them, while fungi the size of small trees pushed up from the forest floor. Imagine walking in such a place. No birdsong, no rustling mammals, only the hiss of insects, the croak of primitive amphibians, and the constant drip of condensation. These forests breathed, and in their breathing, they remade the atmosphere. Through photosynthesis, they released more oxygen than the planet had ever seen before. Over millions of years, layer upon layer of dead plant matter sank into the swampy soil, forming the peat bogs that would one day compress into the coal seams we still mine today. Coal is nothing less than the fossilized breath of these ancient forests, captured in black stone. This lush world was beautiful, but it was also volatile. Oxygen made life powerful, but it also made life fragile. And in that fragile balance, evolution ran wild. Step into the late Carboniferous, about 300 million years ago, and you enter a planet mid-transformation. The continents were drifting toward one another, assembling into a single supercontinent, Pangaea, a vast quilt of land stretching across latitudes and bordered by a global ocean. But the map is only background. What truly defined this era were the forests, and they were unlike anything alive today. No flowers, no fruits, no grasses. The world was still waiting for bees and birds. Their music hadn't been invented yet. Instead, the air hummed with moisture and the low, constant murmur of primitive life. Towering above the swampy ground rose giant lycopsids, ancient club mosses, reaching heights close to a 10-story building. They weren't trees in the modern sense. Their trunks were hollow, water-laden columns, and they reproduced with spores, not seeds. Around them stood seed ferns and colossal horsetails, their segmented stalks ribbed like pipe organs. Even fungi joined the arms race, some forms swelling to the size of small trees and lifting dark umbrellaed caps into the filtered light. Beneath that canopy, the air was heavy, almost syrupy, and every surface sweated with condensation. If you were to kneel and touch the ground, your hand would sink into a mattress of damp litter, peat in the making. This was a world engineered for growth. Photosynthesis ran hot. Day after day, leaf after leaf, the forest poured oxygen into the sky. As plants died, they fell into waterlogged soils and stagnant backwaters where decay struggled to keep up. Layer upon layer of carbon-rich debris built the peat bogs that, over deep time and pressure, transformed into coal. In a quiet way, those swamps were writing a long, black diary of the planet's breath, pages we would one day tear open and burn. High oxygen changes everything. At an estimated 30 to 35% of the atmosphere, a candle would have burned faster, your own breath would have felt oddly stimulating, and lightning could have lit even soggy forests like matchsticks. It was a recipe for both abundance and catastrophe, growth fueled by oxygen, checked by fire. And amid that chemistry, one group found perfect conditions: arthropods. Insects, spiders, millipedes, scorpions, creatures armored in chitin and powered by a simple, elegant respiratory design, thrived not just in number, but in size. Vertebrates were present, but they were still working through their limitations. Early amphibians had made landfall, some stretching to impressive lengths, yet they remained tethered to moisture, skin that needed wetness, eggs that needed water. Reptiles were just beginning to appear, bringing dry, scaly skin and the first shelled eggs that would eventually free their descendants from the swamps. For now, they were supporting actors. The spotlight belonged to the invertebrates. Why did insects grow so large? Part of the answer rests in how they breathe. Unlike us, they had no lungs, no diaphragm, no red blood cells shuttling oxygen. Instead, their bodies were laced with tiny tubes, tracheae, opening to the outside through spiracles. Oxygen drifted in by diffusion, seeping down a branching network that delivered it straight to tissues. In our world of 21% oxygen, diffusion sets a hard size limit. Too large a body, and the center starves for air. In a 35% world, those limits receded. Air, heavy with oxygen, could reach deeper, and scaling up became possible. The forest air itself was an evolutionary steroid, and the arthropods drank it in. Close your eyes and breathe slowly. Imagine that dense, humid atmosphere, the hiss of unseen wings above, the rustle of many legs below, and the soft creak of water-filled trunks. A planet inhaling, lush, volatile, alive. Let's pause on this extraordinary question. How did insects become giants in the first place? The secret lies in their breathing. Unlike mammals with lungs or reptiles with rib cages that pump air, insects rely on a system that looks almost too simple for survival. No lungs, no diaphragm, no bloodstream ferrying oxygen. Instead, their bodies are crisscrossed with millions of tiny tubes called tracheae, opening to the outside world through little pores in the exoskeleton known as spiracles. Oxygen doesn't need a chauffeur. It simply drifts inside, diffusing passively until every cell is fed. It's as if the whole body is one big sponge, soaking in the atmosphere. It works beautifully when the creature is small. A grasshopper, a beetle, even a modern dragonfly can thrive on this diffusion system. But scale is the enemy. The larger the body, the harder it becomes to deliver oxygen efficiently to its deepest tissues. That's why, in today's air, most insects hit a ceiling. The largest modern giants, like New Zealand's hefty weta, reach only a few inches long. They can sit comfortably in your palm, not exactly nightmare fuel. But in the Carboniferous world, oxygen was everywhere, pouring through those tracheae with ease. Suddenly, size wasn't a problem. Insects ballooned into forms that look impossible today. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than a hawk's, millipedes as long as sofas, scorpions stalking the shadows like armored cats. High oxygen acted as a performance enhancer, written into the air itself, and arthropods seized the opportunity. This isn't just a guess, it's been tested. In 2007, researchers at Arizona State University raised modern insects in controlled chambers, tinkering with oxygen levels like evolutionary puppeteers. The results were startling. In atmospheres richer than ours, some dragonflies and beetles grew larger than their normal size, echoing their ancient ancestors. Their DNA still holds the potential, it just can't be expressed under modern conditions. The Carboniferous didn't invent new insects, it simply unlocked the size settings already hidden in their biology. Imagine standing in that ancient forest, boots sinking into spongy peat. The air feels thick, humid, intoxicating. Each breath quickens your pulse. You look up, and shadows flit through the canopy. At first, you might think of birds, but there were no birds yet. What you hear is the rush of membranous wings, wide and veined like stained glass windows, catching beams of filtered light. For a moment, your mind struggles. The proportions are wrong. This isn't the world you know. Above you glides a Paleodictyopteran, one of Earth's first flyers. With wings spanning nearly 2 feet, it floats gently between the trunks, sipping plant sap with a needle-like proboscis. It's harmless to you, yet surreal in its presence, a reminder that evolution was experimenting wildly. 6 wing-like extensions sprout from its body, 4 strong enough for flight, 2 little more than stabilizers, perhaps remnants of a time when wings were still new. Evolution was fumbling in the dark, yet somehow creating creatures that defied the ground itself. The air was heavy, the plants alien, and life was rewriting its own rules. And from gentle gliders, the Carboniferous skies soon gave way to hunters. Now, lift your gaze higher. The flutter of gentle sap sippers is gone, replaced by something faster, sharper. A shadow streaks across the filtered sunlight, wings beating like sails in a storm. This is Meganeura, the terror of the Carboniferous skies, an insect so large it makes modern dragonflies look like toys. Its wingspan stretched nearly 70 centimeters, almost the length of a grown human's arm. When it swooped overhead, it owned the air. Meganeura was not a glider, drifting lazily between trees. It was a predator. Its 4 wings could beat independently, granting it mastery over the air, hovering, banking, diving, accelerating with terrifying precision. Its compound eyes, enormous and faceted like twin globes of glass, granted nearly 360-degree vision. Nothing moved unnoticed, and when it spotted prey, the outcome was almost inevitable. Studies of modern dragonflies show success rates above 90% when they hunt. Imagine that ability scaled up, each attack nearly guaranteed a kill. Its prey wasn't just gnats or mosquitoes. Fossil evidence suggests Meganeura feasted on smaller insects, juvenile amphibians, even tiny reptiles struggling in this alien forest. Its legs bristled with spines, forming a spiny basket mid-flight. Once prey blundered into the deadly net, it was over. Claws closed, wings beat harder, and the victim was devoured before ever reaching the ground. No chase, no struggle, just capture and consume. In the humid twilight of the Carboniferous canopy, Meganeura was king. And yet, even kings begin as something smaller. Like its modern cousins, Meganeura likely spent much of its life as a nymph in water. Picture a shallow Carboniferous pond, thick with reeds, amphibians squirming along the edges, and strange crustaceans darting in the mud. Beneath the surface lurked the juvenile form of this aerial predator. Equipped with gills and sharp mandibles, it lay in ambush, striking at tadpoles and insect larvae. Only after several molts did it rise from the water, spreading its colossal wings to dry in the heavy air before taking to the skies. The first fossils of Meganeura were found in France in 1880, and more have since turned up across Europe and North America. The veins in their wings form intricate lattices, like delicate architecture, strong enough to endure flight, light enough to catch the breeze. These patterns are so distinctive that paleontologists can recognize the species from wings alone. It is as though the insects signed their presence into stone with geometry. For millions of years, Meganeura dominated the aerial world. Birds were still in the distant future. Bats wouldn't appear for another 250 million years. The skies of the Carboniferous belonged entirely to insects. If you had lived then, every step through the swamp forest would have been under the gaze of compound eyes high above, waiting, calculating, ready to strike. And yet, even on the ground, The world had predators that could chill the blood, creatures that scuttled through the shadows, armored, venomous, and patient. Beneath the canopy, where the light filtered into a green gloom, the air was never truly still. Something stirred in the shadows, not the delicate flutter of wings, but the deliberate scrape of armored legs against wet leaves. If Meganura ruled the skies, then on the forest floor a new terror waited, the giant scorpion Pulmonoscorpius kirktonensis. At nearly 70 centimeters long, it was about the size of a house cat, though far less cuddly. Imagine encountering that in the half-dark of a swamp, gleaming black armor plates, claws opening and closing with a hollow click, and a tail arched high above, curved into a ready sting. Its movements were slow, calculated, almost theatrical. Pulmonoscorpius didn't need to hurry. It was an apex predator, confident that the forest floor itself would eventually deliver prey to its waiting ambush. Its arsenal was formidable. The pedipalps, those front claws, were enormous, lined with serrated ridges for gripping and crushing. Fossil evidence suggests they could snap down with enough force to pin amphibians or slice through the exoskeletons of other arthropods. Once trapped, there was no escape. And then, of course, came the sting. While no fossil preserves the venom gland, there is no reason to believe this creature lacked one. Like modern scorpions, a single strike would have injected a dose powerful enough to paralyze or kill smaller vertebrates. Its sensory tools were equally impressive. Two central eyes likely provided depth perception, while lateral eyes dotted its carapace, scanning for light and motion. Even more subtle were the tiny sensory hairs along its legs, trichobothria that could detect the faintest vibrations, the tremor of a frog's footstep, the rustle of an insect brushing against moss. Pulmonoscorpius could feel its world long before its prey even knew it was near. The ambush was its specialty. Picture it, tucked beneath the fallen trunk of a lycopsid, armored body blending with the wet, blackened bark. A juvenile amphibian, only a few inches long, hops past. A flicker of motion, a lightning-fast snap of claws, a downward sting. Silence. Then the scorpion feeds. Fossils of Pulmonoscorpius have been found in Scotland's Kirkton Quarry, a site that once held a thriving swamp ecosystem. There, these scorpions lived alongside amphibians, millipedes, and early reptiles, all of them part of a precarious food web woven from oxygen and damp decay. For a brief time, this predator was untouchable. Modern scorpions rarely exceed 20 centimeters, but back then, the hyperoxic air allowed its ancestors to reach nightmarish proportions. And yet, as menacing as Pulmonoscorpius was, it was not the largest arthropod of its world. In fact, lurking deeper in the swamps, winding between tree roots and vanishing into the mist, there existed something even more colossal. At first glance, you might mistake it for a fallen log, but then it moves. Segmented plates ripple like armor, and dozens of legs churn methodically through mud. This was Arthropleura, the undisputed giant of the Carboniferous forest floor. At first, you'd think it was a log, an old waterlogged trunk sprawled across the swamp floor. But then it bends, sliding around a tree, and dozens of legs ripple in perfect rhythm. This was Arthropleura, the largest land invertebrate that has ever lived. It could reach lengths of 2.5 meters, or over 8 feet, longer than a man is tall, wider than a child could wrap their arms around. Imagine standing in the forest, only to see a millipede the size of a kayak moving slowly but unstoppably toward you. Its body was a fortress of segmented armor plates, interlocking like roof tiles. These dorsal plates provided protection from above, while still allowing a surprising degree of flexibility. Beneath them, countless legs pumped like pistons, propelling this colossal creature across mud, peat, and decaying vegetation. Each movement left deep, undulating trackways in the sediment, footprints so wide and clear that even today, preserved in stone, you could lie down inside them. Despite its intimidating size, Arthropleura wasn't a predator. Its jaws, as far as fossil evidence suggests, lacked the piercing or slicing adaptations needed for hunting. Instead, it was most likely a detritivore, feeding on decomposing plant matter, mosses, and perhaps fungi. In a sense, it was the forest recycler, grinding decaying vegetation into mulch. This role may sound humble, but in an ecosystem producing staggering amounts of biomass, decomposers were just as essential as hunters. Without them, the forest floor would have drowned under its own abundance. Yet, size alone was a defense. In a world with predators like giant scorpions, being enormous was its own form of armor. Few creatures would dare challenge an animal that stretched the length of a sofa and weighed as much as a large dog. Its armored plates, mass, and sheer presence likely kept it safe from nearly everything else alive at the time. Pulmonoscorpius might have been fearsome, but even it would have hesitated before striking a creature this immense. Fossil remains of Arthropleura are scattered across what is now Europe and North America, particularly in ancient wetland deposits. These fossils are often fragmentary, plates, body segments, or trackways, but together they paint a picture of a creature that dominated its environment. The most haunting evidence comes from those tracks, massive grooves winding across Carboniferous mudflats, preserved like a signature in the Earth's diary. And yet, for all its enormity, much about Arthropleura remains a mystery. We have no complete fossil of its head. We don't know exactly how it fed, how it reproduced, or how it protected its young, if it protected them at all. Some paleontologists speculate that it laid eggs in hidden burrows, its young hatching like armies of armored caterpillars. Others suggest it may have simply released them into the swamp, leaving survival to chance. In either case, its reign lasted millions of years before disappearing, leaving only fragments for us to piece together. In the Carboniferous, nature experimented boldly. On the ground, armored giants recycled the forests. In the air, monstrous dragonflies hunted like hawks. And in the rivers and swamps, still stranger creatures lurked, ones that blurred the line between spider, scorpion, and something entirely alien. For decades, textbooks spoke of the largest spider that ever lived, Megarachne. Paleontologists painted a picture of an eight-legged nightmare, a dinner plate-sized hunter stalking the undergrowth of the Carboniferous swamps. It seemed almost too perfect. Giant dragonflies in the skies, colossal millipedes on the ground, and, of course, an enormous spider to complete the horror story. But in 2005, the tale shifted. A re-examination of the original fossil by Dr. Paul Selden and his team revealed something astonishing. Megarachne was no spider at all. It wasn't even a true arachnid. Instead, it belonged to the Eurypterids, a group more commonly known as sea scorpions. In a single scientific paper, the giant spider of legend was demoted into something arguably stranger, an aquatic predator crawling through freshwater swamps. Megarachne was squat-bodied, armored, with paddle-like limbs built for raking through the mud. Rather than spinning webs, it sifted sediment in search of worms, insect larvae, or small crustaceans. Its flat body pressed low against the swamp bed, camouflaged among fallen leaves and decomposing vegetation. When it moved, it swept its limbs wide, dragging potential prey into its grasp. Imagine a creature that looked like a spider crossed with a horseshoe crab, scuttling silently along the dark bottoms of stagnant pools. Even if it wasn't a spider, Megarachne still earned its place among the Carboniferous oddities. Measuring around half a meter in body length, it was massive for an invertebrate of its niche. Its armor was thick, its movements slow but deliberate. Unlike its larger marine Eurypterid cousins, which could reach several meters in length, Megarachne was adapted to freshwater, a pioneer bridging the gap between ancient seas and inland wetlands. Its misidentification wasn't just a scientific slip. It showed how alien this world truly was. Fossils often deceive us. A flattened carapace, segmented like a spider's abdomen, can trick even the most careful eye. For years, schoolchildren shuddered at illustrations of the giant Carboniferous spider, never knowing that the real creature was something stranger, more aquatic, more alien. In truth, it may have been less frightening than a huge web-spinning predator, but it still lurked in a place that would unsettle any human who stumbled into its swamp. Megarachne reminds us of a deeper point. The Carboniferous wasn't just about size, it was about experimentation. Evolution was testing new blueprints, filling every niche it could find. Some designs were dead ends, abandoned by time. Others laid the groundwork for entire lineages that survive today. And in the undergrowth of those ancient forests, true terrestrial predators, arachnids that did breathe air and stalk land, were already emerging. Among them were the trigonotarbids, creatures that looked like spiders but weren't. They had armor-plated bodies, sharp jaws, and 8 nimble legs. They couldn't spin silk, but they didn't need to. They were hunters of the forest floor, among the first air-breathing predators to truly abandon water and claim the land. Compared to Arthropleura or Meganeura, they were small, but size wasn't everything. In a world of giants, stealth and adaptability could be just as powerful. In the cluttered undergrowth of the Carboniferous forests, where decaying fronds and hollow trunks formed mazes of shadow, a new kind of predator thrived, small, armored, and efficient. These were the trigonotarbids, often mistaken for spiders in the fossil record, but belonging to their own unique branch of arachnids. They were not web spinners. They lacked silk glands entirely. Instead, they hunted with speed and stealth, crawling low over damp peat and rotting leaves, ambushing prey with sharp jaws and nimble legs. Trigonotarbids weren't giants. Most measured just a few millimeters to a couple of inches long, yet their small size was their greatest strength. In a world where dragonflies had wingspans wider than dinner plates and millipedes stretched longer than a grown man, the trigonotarbids avoided attention. They lived in the margins where giants blundered past but seldom stooped to notice. In the darkness of fallen logs and fern litter, they ruled their miniature kingdoms. Their bodies were encased in heavy armor, a carapace that shielded their head and thorax, with their abdomens segmented into plated sections. Fossils show they breathed through book lungs, stacked paper-thin sheets of tissue that exchanged gases efficiently in the oxygen-rich air. Their legs were spiny and agile, allowing them to navigate tangled roots and slick detritus. When a soft-bodied insect scuttled by, the trigonotarbid pounced, jaws clamping down to crush and tear. The victim was held tight by hooked legs, consumed alive in silence. The remarkable thing about trigonotarbids is how well their fossils have preserved. In places like the Rhynie Chert in Scotland, we can still see their delicate hairs, their respiratory structures, even fine details of their segmented armor. It is as though time pressed pause on these tiny hunters, capturing them in exquisite detail for us to study 400 million years later. They stand as some of the earliest examples of fully terrestrial predators, creatures no longer tied to water, fully committed to life on land. And yet, like so many evolutionary experiments, their reign was temporary. For tens of millions of years, trigonotarbids flourished. Then, quietly, they vanished. No asteroid ended them. No catastrophic extinction erased their line. Instead, they were simply outpaced. Spiders arrived, bearing the one adaptation trigonotarbids never achieved: silk. With silk, spiders could weave webs, construct shelters, protect their eggs. It was a tool that reshaped survival strategies. Trigonotarbids, with their armor and claws, could not compete with the versatility of silk weavers. Slowly, they faded into extinction, their niche stolen by more adaptable descendants. But while the trigonotarbids disappeared, other experiments in defense were already underway. In the Devonian seas that preceded the Carboniferous, a creature emerged so heavily armored it looked less like a worm and more like a living weapon. Scientists would later call it Lepidocaris, but it became better known by its poetic nickname, the Excalibur worm. With a body wrapped in interlocking plates of crystalline armor, it was a fortress disguised as a worm, daring predators to try and break through. Evolution wasn't just inventing hunters, it was also designing fortresses. The Excalibur worm, its formal name, Lepidocaris, wasn't the kind of creature you'd expect to loom large in the story of life. It was tiny, only a few centimeters long, and it lived not in the swamps of the Carboniferous, but earlier, in the shallow reefs of the Devonian period. Yet, despite its size, it carried something extraordinary: armor unlike anything else on Earth. Its body was wrapped in overlapping plates of crystalline calcite, like a medieval knight's chainmail forged at microscopic scale. Imagine a worm that could curl into a ball, presenting only its hard outer shell to the world. To a predator, it would have been nearly impenetrable. The Excalibur worm's defense strategy was simple but absolute. You may find me, but you will not break me. No other worm, before or since, carried such intricate protection. It was as if nature, experimenting wildly in those ancient seas, built a living fortress and dared the world to test it. Fossils of this creature were first discovered in Western Australia, preserved in reef deposits more than 400 million years old. The plates shine faintly under light, revealing the delicate interlocking pattern. To paleontologists, it seemed almost out of place, too advanced, too finely constructed for such an early chapter in evolution. That uncanny perfection is what earned it its nickname, the Excalibur worm, after the legendary sword of King Arthur. But even the best armor comes at a cost. The heavy plates slowed the worm, limited its flexibility, and likely reduced its ability to spread into new environments. It could survive an attack, but not outrun competition. As predators became faster and ecosystems more complex, survival by pure defense alone became a losing strategy. The Excalibur worm eventually vanished, leaving behind only fossils, tiny reminders of evolution's extravagant experiments. Its story adds depth to our understanding of this ancient world. The Carboniferous wasn't just an age of giants, it was part of a longer chain of evolutionary gambles. Some creatures grew massive on oxygen-rich air. Others built fortresses of stone around fragile bodies. Each solution worked for a time, but time is ruthless. What cannot adapt eventually fades. Back in the Carboniferous swamps, other creatures were solving the same challenge: how to breathe, how to survive in oxygen so dense it was almost intoxicating. For arthropods, their tracheal systems suddenly allowed gigantism. For amphibians, the story was different. Their lungs were primitive, little more than sacs, but in the heavy oxygen-rich air, they worked far more efficiently than they would today. Some amphibians reached lengths of 4 or 5 meters, prowling the edges of swamps with wide mouths ready to gulp fish or unlucky insects. But amphibians still had a fatal weakness: their eggs. Without shells, they had to be laid in water, forever tying them to swamps and ponds. As the Carboniferous climate shifted, this dependency would become dangerous. Yet in that weakness lay the spark of something new. The adaptation that would one day give rise to reptiles, dinosaurs, birds, and mammals, including us. By the middle of the Carboniferous, amphibians had become the swamp lords. Some stretched over 4 meters long, their wide mouths bristling with primitive teeth. Their bodies half fish, half lizard. They lurked in stagnant pools and slow-moving rivers, waiting for prey to stumble close. With lungs that worked better in the oxygen-rich atmosphere, they could venture further onto land than their Devonian ancestors ever dared. Still, they carried a burden. Their reproduction tied them forever to water. Their soft eggs would dry out if exposed to air. No matter how powerful these amphibians became, their future was chained to the swamps. And this is where evolution's next great gamble arrived: the amniotic egg. Around 320 million years ago, the first reptiles emerged. They were small, no larger than a modern lizard, but they carried an innovation that would change history. Their eggs had protective shells and internal membranes, keeping the embryos safe and moist, even away from water. Suddenly, vertebrates were no longer tethered to the ponds. They could lay eggs in drier soil, move into new territories, and explore habitats amphibians could not endure. These early reptiles, creatures like Hylonomus, had dry, scaly skin that resisted water loss. They were light, quick, and cautious, weaving through the dense roots of giant ferns and horsetails. While amphibians sprawled in the wetlands, reptiles ventured into uplands, adapting to the drier patches forming as climates shifted. Their lungs and circulatory systems were more efficient, their movements more agile. In an oxygen-rich world, they did not grow to gigantic proportions. Instead, Their advantage was resilience. When the great swamps began to shrink, reptiles were ready. But for now, the Carboniferous was still the age of arthropods. Insects soared above, scorpions prowled below, and strength was another factor that helped them dominate. If we were to measure strength pound for pound across the animal kingdom, insects would win. A dung beetle today can pull over 1,000 times its body weight. Leafcutter ants carry loads many times heavier than themselves. The trapjaw ant can snap its mandibles with a force that seems impossible for such a small body. Now, imagine these feats scaled up under hyperoxic skies. A dragonfly the size of a hawk not only flew, it hunted with the efficiency of a fighter jet. A millipede longer than a human didn't need fangs to terrify. Its size alone was its armor, yet change was coming. The vast rainforests that fed these creatures oxygen were beginning to falter. Tectonic forces drove the continents closer, raising mountains and shifting winds. Once continuous swamps fragmented into patches. Drier air intruded where humidity had reigned for millions of years. Fires, once occasional, became more frequent. Oxygen levels, once soaring at 35%, began their slow descent. The very fuel that had powered gigantism would no longer be abundant. The Carboniferous giants had reached their peak. Their dominance, though staggering, was about to slip away. By the late Carboniferous, the world was changing. What had once been an endless expanse of humid, swampy rainforest was fracturing into patches. The great lycopsid trees, giant club mosses that had built the oxygen empire, were no longer spreading without limit. As tectonic plates collided, mountain ranges rose, altering wind and rainfall. The swamps that had fueled gigantism began to dry, and with them, the atmospheric chemistry shifted. Oxygen levels that had once soared as high as 35% started to fall, dropping toward 25%. That might still sound generous compared to our modern 21%, but for creatures built to exploit supercharged air, it was catastrophic. Giant insects, scorpions, and millipedes suddenly struggled to get enough oxygen to support their massive bodies. Their respiratory systems, so efficient in a hyperoxic world, were being tested against new limits. For the first time in tens of millions of years, size was no longer an advantage. Meanwhile, the very plants that had fueled the oxygen boom were facing new adversaries. Fungi, which had long been relatively primitive decomposers, were evolving new enzymatic tools. A particular group, white rot fungi, developed the ability to break down lignin, the tough polymer that made ancient trees rigid. This innovation rewired the planet's carbon cycle. Until then, dead trees had piled up, locking carbon underground and leaving oxygen free in the atmosphere. Now, fungi could decompose wood completely, releasing carbon dioxide back into the air. The one-way street of oxygen buildup became a balanced exchange. Oxygen stopped climbing. The reign of the giants was ending. This ecological shift is known today as the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, around 305 million years ago. Swamps withered, amphibians lost their stronghold, and arthropod titans dwindled. Some lineages survived in smaller forms, adapting to the new equilibrium. Others vanished entirely, their immense bodies unsustainable in the thinner air. It was extinction by suffocation, not in an instant, but over countless generations. Yet where one empire crumbles, another rises. The reptiles, small, scaly, and adaptive, thrived in this new world. Their amniotic eggs freed them from swamp dependency, and their efficient lungs allowed them to breathe in drier air. They did not grow into monsters overnight, but step by step, they advanced. From those fragile beginnings would eventually come dinosaurs, birds, and mammals. In a way, our existence is tied directly to this moment of collapse. Had oxygen stayed high, perhaps insects would have ruled the skies forever, and vertebrates would have remained background actors. The Carboniferous world was a paradox, lush yet volatile, abundant yet fragile. Its oxygen peak gave us dragonflies the size of hawks and millipedes as long as cars, but its decline cleared the stage for the vertebrates that would come to dominate Earth. Every breath we take today, 21% oxygen, balanced, stable, is the legacy of that collapse. Still, scientists have wondered, could such a hyperoxic world ever return? The answer lies in the deep interplay between plants, fungi, and fire. To understand why a 35% oxygen atmosphere will never return, we need to look closely at one of evolution's most subtle but world-shaping arms races, the battle over lignin. Lignin is a tough polymer that plants began to produce around 400 million years ago. It gave them structural strength, allowing stems and trunks to rise higher than ever before. Without lignin, forests of 100-foot lycopsids would never have towered over the Carboniferous swamps. It was lignin that made trees rigid, lifting their leaves towards sunlight and driving the photosynthetic engine that flooded the air with oxygen. But lignin also had a unique property. Nothing on Earth could break it down efficiently at first. When those giant plants died, their woody remains didn't rot completely. Instead, much of that carbon-rich tissue was buried in swampy soils. Each tree that fell locked away carbon and left its oxygen behind. This imbalance, carbon stored, oxygen released, drove atmospheric oxygen to its dizzying peak. Then came the counterpunch. Sometime near the end of the Carboniferous, a group of fungi evolved enzymes capable of dismantling lignin. These white rot fungi revolutionized decomposition. Suddenly, dead wood could be broken down fully. Carbon was no longer trapped in the ground. It returned to the air as carbon dioxide. The one-way conveyor belt of oxygen production snapped. From then on, Earth's oxygen cycle became a two-way street, plants producing it, decomposers consuming it. Oxygen never again climbed to those extreme levels. We can still see the fingerprints of this shift today. Every forest floor is alive with decomposers, fungi, bacteria, termites, working tirelessly to recycle carbon. Every fallen log is eventually returned to soil and air. Modern forests remain lush, but they do not bury oxygen into the sky the way Carboniferous swamps once did. The permanent recycling system, born with lignin-eating fungi, closed the door on hyperoxia forever. There was another balancing factor too: fire. High oxygen makes flames easier to ignite and harder to control. Laboratory tests show that at 35% oxygen, even damp wood burns readily. Ancient forests would have been prone to frequent, devastating wildfires. These fires consume plant matter before it could be buried, releasing more carbon dioxide into the air and preventing oxygen from climbing higher. In this way, fire acted as a planetary safety valve, ensuring the atmosphere didn't tip into levels that would have made forests unsustainable. This combination, fungi recycling wood and fires curbing excess, created a feedback loop that stabilized Earth's oxygen at much lower levels. By the Permian period, oxygen hovered closer to 25%, still higher than today, but far less than the Carboniferous peak. From that point onward, the atmospheric balance was set. The Carboniferous giants were possible because they lived in a narrow window of imbalance. Once nature corrected itself, that window slammed shut. It has never reopened. And yet, the story of oxygen does not end there. Earth's atmosphere has swung wildly through history, shaping the destiny of life again and again. To see the full picture, we must zoom out to billions of years, to the dawn of oxygen itself. For the first 2 billion years of Earth's history, there was almost no free oxygen in the air at all. The atmosphere was dominated by nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and methane, more like Mars or Venus than the breathable sky we take for granted today. Life existed, but it was microbial and anaerobic, thriving in chemical soups without a molecule of O2 to spare. To those organisms, oxygen was not a gift, it was poison. Then, about 2.4 billion years ago, something happened that changed everything. The Great Oxygenation Event. Tiny cyanobacteria, simple microbes, perfected photosynthesis, using sunlight to split water molecules, releasing oxygen as waste. At first, that oxygen didn't accumulate in the air. It reacted with dissolved iron in the oceans, forming massive rust-colored deposits we still mine today, the famous banded iron formations. But slowly, the sinks filled, and oxygen began to spill into the sky. From the perspective of ancient microbes, this was an apocalypse. Entire lineages of anaerobes were wiped out or forced into oxygen-free niches underground, undersea, or inside sediments. What was toxic to them became the foundation for everything that followed. Oxygen, so reactive, so volatile, became fuel for complexity. With it came the first eukaryotic cells, cells with nuclei, the building blocks of animals, plants, and fungi. For the next billion years, oxygen levels stayed relatively low, perhaps 1 to 10% of today's levels. Enough to support more complexity, but not enough to allow large animals. Then, around 800 million years ago, oxygen began to rise again. By the time of the Cambrian explosion, about 541 million years ago, oxygen levels may have reached 15%. That rise coincided with one of the greatest bursts of innovation in life's history. Animals with skeletons, shells, eyes, and limbs suddenly appeared in the fossil record, diversifying across the seas. From there, the oxygen story tracks closely with evolution's milestones. As plants colonized land around 450 million years ago, photosynthesis scaled up. Oxygen levels climbed higher, and by the Carboniferous, they reached the infamous peak of 30 to 35%. That was the moment of giants, the era of arthropods swollen to impossible sizes. But the balance never held. After fungi learned to decompose lignin and fires spread across drier lands, oxygen fell. In the Permian and Triassic periods, levels may have dipped as low as 15%. Imagine breathing in such an atmosphere. Every breath would feel like standing at high altitude. For animals, it was a selective force, driving the evolution of more efficient lungs and circulatory systems. It was in these low-oxygen worlds that reptiles adapted, paving the way for dinosaurs, mammals, and eventually us. Oxygen rose again during the Cretaceous, peaking near 25 to 30%. Then it declined steadily to today's equilibrium, 21%. That number isn't random, it's the balance point between oxygen produced by photosynthesis and oxygen consumed by respiration, fire, and decay. It's high enough to sustain complex life like us, but low enough to keep the planet from bursting into constant flame. Our very existence, our lungs, our brains, our blood, is tuned to this level. Too little, and we suffocate. Too much, and fire consumes the world. When we breathe today's 21% oxygen, it feels natural, ordinary. But in truth, it is a razor-thin equilibrium, the product of billions of years of biological push and geological pull. Our bodies are exquisitely tuned to it. The alveoli in our lungs, the hemoglobin in our blood, the metabolic rates that fuel our brains, they all evolve for this Goldilocks range. Not too little, not too much. What would it be like if we were suddenly dropped into the Carboniferous world of 35% oxygen? At first, you might feel euphoric, lightheaded, almost drunk on air. But that sensation would soon turn dangerous. Oxygen at those concentrations can cause seizures, organ damage, even death. Fire would be a constant hazard. One spark could ignite entire forests, even when wet. Modern humans would not last long in such a place. And yet, for the creatures of that world, hyperoxia was liberation. Arthropods grew huge, amphibians pushed further onto land, and vertebrates experimented with new respiratory strategies. In many ways, it was oxygen itself that sculpted their bodies. But when levels fell, as they inevitably did, those who could not adapt disappeared. This rise and fall is why today's dragonflies are the size of your hand, not the size of hawks. Our dependence on oxygen is so complete that even small changes affect us. At high altitudes, where the partial pressure of oxygen is lower, climbers struggle with breathlessness, fatigue, and altitude sickness. Stay long enough, and the body adapts, producing more red blood cells, fine-tuning hemoglobin to hold oxygen more tightly. At the other extreme, doctors use hyperbaric oxygen therapy, pressurized chambers with enriched oxygen, to treat conditions from decompression sickness to carbon monoxide poisoning. Too little oxygen can kill us. Too much can also kill us. We survive only in the balance. This balancing act also shapes how we imagine life elsewhere. Astronomers hunting for exoplanets look eagerly for oxygen in alien atmospheres. Free oxygen is unstable. It reacts quickly with rocks, gases, and metals. If it's present in abundance, something must be replenishing it, usually through photosynthesis. Finding oxygen on another world would be a strong hint of life. Maybe not intelligent life, but at least microbial life, changing its planet the way cyanobacteria once changed ours. The lesson from the Carboniferous is clear. Atmospheres are not static. They evolve, and with them, life itself. Too much oxygen gave us giants. Too little favored efficient lungs and compact bodies. The waxing and waning of this one gas has repeatedly rewritten the story of evolution. We walk through our lives breathing without thought, yet every breath is a reminder of Earth's long atmospheric history, of chance, collapse, and adaptation. And now, for the first time, we are not just passengers in this story. Humans, by burning coal and oil, the ancient forests of the Carboniferous, are ever so slightly lowering oxygen levels while raising carbon dioxide. The change is small for oxygen, but profound for climate. Just as fungi and fires reshaped the atmosphere millions of years ago, so now do we. The story of the Carboniferous oxygen peak closes with a paradox. Those vast forests, those monstrous insects, those coal swamps, they were never meant to last forever. They existed because of an imbalance. Plants locking carbon away faster than decomposers could return it. That imbalance created a one-time window, a world that could not be repeated once fungi evolved to break lignin, once fires became more frequent, once reptiles rose to inherit the land. But though the giants vanished, their legacy did not. The coal seams that fuel our power plants are their compressed remains, the breath of those forests stored for 300 million years. Every time we burn a lump of coal, we are undoing what the Carboniferous once created, releasing back into the sky the carbon that made the world of giants possible. In a strange way, our industrial civilization is built on the oxygen boom of long ago. We burn the past to power the present. We also carry echoes of that time in our bodies. The lungs that fill with air, the hemoglobin that carries oxygen through our blood, the brains that demand constant energy, all are the products of evolutionary pressures shaped by fluctuating oxygen. When levels dropped after the Carboniferous, vertebrates with more efficient lungs survived. Reptiles, with their watertight skin and amniotic eggs, thrived where amphibians faltered. From them came dinosaurs, birds, and mammals, and, eventually, us. We are descendants of that atmospheric shift, living proof that collapse can also be opportunity. And yet, looking back at the Carboniferous reminds us of fragility. Life is adaptable, but not unbreakable. When atmospheres change quickly, extinctions follow. In the Carboniferous, the change took millions of years, and still entire groups vanished. Today, our atmosphere is changing in mere centuries. Oxygen itself remains steady, but carbon dioxide, another player in the balance, is climbing at a rate unseen in geological history. We are conducting, knowingly or not, a planetary experiment, one whose results will echo for millennia. But there is hope in the story too. The Carboniferous shows that Earth has endured radical shifts before. Oxygen has risen and fallen. Climates have swung between extremes. Yet life has persisted. Not unchanged, not unscathed, but alive. The dragonflies of today may be smaller than Meganeura, but they are still perfect hunters. Their flight mechanics barely altered from those ancient skies. The scorpions of today may fit in your hand, but their lineage stretches back to those cat-sized predators under swamp trunks. Life adapts, reshapes, and continues. So, when we look at a dragonfly hovering above a pond, or when we shovel coal from deep underground, we are looking at ghosts of the Carboniferous. We are breathing the inheritance of forests that fell 300 million years ago. The giants are gone, their window closed, but their fingerprints remain in the rocks, in our bodies, and in the air itself. Earth has been many worlds. The Carboniferous was one of its strangest, a time when oxygen nearly set the planet ablaze and insects grew to impossible sizes. To remember that world is to remember that change is the only constant. Atmospheres shift, life adapts. And from the ashes of giants, new lineages rise.